Hello, people. I have finished a book. It's actually 2 days ago that I finished this. Just work and shit keep me busy, so I haven't had time to do the video. Memoirs of a Polish Lancer. This is a guy that, he was in the Napoleonic Wars. Uh, a lot of countries supplied Napoleon with troops. Poland was no exception. Poland was always hoping that Napoleon would champion their cause. And at the end, Napoleon lets them down. But all the German states supplied them with troops. Austria sent troops into Russia, Bavaria, Prussia. Uh, they kind of, after the Russian adventure was over, most people abandoned Napoleon's cause. The Poles, however, did not. The Saxons didn't until after Leipzig. The guy's name, I don't know if I should even try the first name. Desideri Chlapowski. The book was translated from Polish, obviously. I got fourth paragraph. This is in the foreword. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is just a note from the guy that translated it. I have stuck as close to the original Polish as possible, but have had to change the odd word or restructure a sentence where the meaning would otherwise have been lost. Place names are given as Chlapowski offers them, sometimes in the Polish and sometimes in the German or Russian versions. The structure of the memoirs is straightforward, with each chapter covering a specific year. While the story reads for the most part like a diary, Chlapowski occasionally pauses to consider the moral or practical lessons of an incident. These digressions interrupt the flow of the story, but contain some of the most interesting material. See, for example, his reflections on the relative merits of British and French cavalry sabers, or his comments on the ideal proportions of infantry and cavalry to be combined in an advance guard. Chlapowski never misses an opportunity to say how brave the Polish troops are, and he also never misses an opportunity to kind of say how cowardly some of the other nationalities are. I'm sure they weren't all that cowardly. First line on page 8. And the more I think about this first line, this is how he starts the whole thing out. He wrote it like in 1839, so it's many years after, Waterloo was in 1814, so. If only the young had wisdom and the old had strength. That's the sentence he begins. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder whether the young aren't the ones with the wisdom. It's hard to follow. He's with Napoleon while Napoleon is fighting the Prussians. He never even mentions Jena. Just all of a sudden they're at this siege of Danzig. Only he doesn't call it Danzig, he calls it Gdansk. So those two names are interchangeable. I did not know that. And then my note here says there is some peculiar things in this book. Page 35, second to the last page. I remember what this is he's talking about. Second to the last paragraph. He's talking about, he ended up being a messenger for Napoleon. And they didn't have telephones or telegraph. They did have signal towers, but this guy would take off on horseback and have to go 100 miles. So He says, I have described this journey for the benefit of young men who might find themselves having to ride nonstop for several days and nights. They will need very loose-fitting boots, wooden bucket stirrups, and a long saddle with a notched leather surface. You shouldn't eat too much before setting off, and you won't want to eat while you are on the road. When riding by day in hot weather, your throat will feel dry, and you will need a small flask of French cognac to sip, but not gulp. Every deep draught will magnify the fever which you will inevitably get with after a 48-hour ride. In hot weather, you should not drink water, in case you sweat and are weakened thereby. Just by wetting the throat with cognac, a man can refresh himself and gain new vigor. I don't think that's very good advice. There's a decent account of the Battle of Wagram, which is a big battle in Austria, and I've read about it several times. The French almost lost this battle. It was a near-run thing, as they like to say. There's a couple of branches of the Danube where they fight this battle, and the French forces have to build bridges. They have to repair bridges that the Austrians have tried to destroy. And at one point in the battle, it goes on for 3 days. At one point in the battle, the French have lost the day, and they have to recross these bridges. And so they're crossing and recrossing these bridges a couple of times, and the Austrians get the idea to throw some giant logs in the river. And here they say that it's boats laden with stones, but the Austrians float debris down the river, and it causes some of the bridges to collapse. I just think it's kind of cool how you get different stories. The longer ago something was, the more different stories you're going to get. The bookmark. And then my last one is, there's a good account of Borodino. Borodino was a pretty hellacious battle right outside of Moscow. One of the few places, I guess the Russians, they made a little bit of a stand in Smolensk, but Borodino, they had a prepared position, built these redoubts and everything, and they just slugged it out, man. And then my last note is the fire. I'm pretty familiar with Napoleon's campaign in Russia, and I know that after Borodino, it was a day later, they were in Moscow. There wasn't much fighting for Moscow at all, unless you count Borodino. But this is like, seems to be like weeks later that Schlapowski says, all of a sudden we could see that Moscow was on fire, because the fire was reflecting in the clouds. And so Schlapowski must not have gone straight to Moscow. There must have been, maybe they were trying to keep the Russian forces on the move, and he never made it to Moscow. I don't know. But the bookmark. A lot of these used books. This book did come out of my never started, half-finished pile. And that pile's getting a little smaller. This bookmark here, a lot of times I find bookmarks in used books. I find photographs, I find envelopes with addresses on them, all kinds of shit. Somebody ordered this from a book club that's specifically military history. And they paid $21.95 for it. I paid $10. They bought it in 1992. I got a big pile of these things. I don't know. It's a good luck thing. I don't know what it is. Thanks for watching.